This is the day before International Overdose Awareness Day, which my dear friend Megan Tweedy will be talking about here shortly as a part of this conversation. Megan and I grew up in the same town, and her brother, Jeff Meyer, died of a fentanyl overdose a few years ago, and she's become quite the activist and advocate for, the disease model and for fentanyl awareness and, Narcan, and there'll be a ton of links in the show notes. I hope you'll check them out. Yeah, so I was thinking that this podcast could be about, the importance of the day that's coming up.
Yeah, so International Overdose Awareness Day, IOAD. I just now say Overdose Day because it's so long. So, it's the thing that I like about it. It's out of the concept grew out of Australia. And so each community can really make of it what they will. And so no two overdose awareness days are really going to look alike. Although I've gone to Kittitas, Ellensburg's every year. This will be the first year I don't go. And there are similarities for sure. But I like the kind of original wording and messaging that came out of the media push from the organization International Overdose Awareness Day. And its original kind of messaging was, it's the world's largest annual campaign to end overdose. Remember without stigma those who have died and acknowledge the grief of the family and friends left behind. So I love that. And I use that. Like our local Overdose Awareness Day, like I said, it's kind of messaging is morphed a bit more into featuring recovery, which I think, of course, is important. But I have to say, this will be my fourth time attending or speaking or having a role. And I have mixed feelings about it. I think it is not what I would like it to be in its purest form, which is really a place for grief. And I think part of that is we don't get a ton of people who show up in that role. We have a lot of community involvement, a lot of providers, certainly a handful of us who have lost a loved one to overdose. But I think I've never quite let go of what I thought it would be the first year I went, and just this giant kind of place. Giant isn't the right word, but this place to really mourn and grieve and acknowledge this horrific epidemic that we're all still living in. I think there are a lot of stories of hope, which are obviously very important as well. I don't know. I think, and again, I think you get a lot of people who don't, like, we always have a politician who kind of kicks it off. I'm not sure that's always the best choice, just because they're typically not very well versed in the world of substance use disorder. So anyways, that was a long-winded explanation of kind of what it is and what it means to me. And like anything, I just keep showing up, and someday I'll formulate an opinion one way or another or not. Yeah. I'd say I'm neutral on the event as it is.
Well, we should do something here. We should take a second. So we make the assumption that everybody knows who you are because you've been on my podcast. This is the third time, and the first time was at that first year, right?
Was it? Yeah.
Where you spoke. Yeah. So yeah. I would love it if we could pause, because there'll be people that listen to this podcast who've never met you before or don't know your story of grief, and, not to put you in a pickle here but I'd love it if you'd take a minute to introduce yourself either again
Yeah,
or for the first time, and why Overdose Awareness Day is meaningful to you.
absolutely. So my brother, Jeff Meyer, died by fentanyl overdose February 24th, 2020. And I think I started out as really just a devastated sister, bewildered by the world of substance use disorder, and really someone who's just grappling with the grief of how the hell did this happen. I remember I said that probably every day for a couple of years, like, how does this happen? And I understand now how it happens, that the science, if you will, but the emotional part of it, I'm not sure you ever understand. You have this just amazing, gregarious, sensitive, loving guy, a father, just a generous soul, and just a good spirited person whom everyone loved. Like, he just was that person people gravitated towards. And like, how does he end up, dead and alone for 3 days before he's even found? And I think, like, telling that story is so important over and over. But I always fear people don't really want to, they do want to hear it. We're all drawn to the train wreck, but the part of connecting that story to, how it really does happen and what we can do, there is still such a gap between the two. Like, it's easy to listen to someone's, horrific story, but then to walk away from it impacted for more than a few minutes of like, wow, this really is plague of sorts that our communities are facing. And I don't, that's a struggle for me, how I go from point A to point B, and what does that story even look like anymore?
Yeah. Well, and I knew Jeff as well, right? So for the audience that doesn't know, we went to high school together, and so in this case it touches a wide circle of folks. My dear friend, your husband, worked with Jeff, and I'm going to start to maybe insert this concept of stigma into the conversation, if that's okay with you.
Yeah,
Because I think that's the bridge towards the actual solving, towards sword solving, or that's my proposal. I'd love to explore that with you a bit. But here's what I think is true for most folks, because my podcast, if they're a regular listener on here, most of the folks that I'm talking to are alcoholics or drug, not all, but most, right? And so that's the lane I'm in, because that's my life experience. Even though I would have been a perfect candidate had I been active when fentanyl entered the, pardon the pun, the bloodstream of America. It's not a pun. What is that? Anyway, it's a kind of weird use of words there. But so this idea that I think most people have is they, let's just say you walk around Seattle, and you see people, that are potentially in trouble with drugs, or maybe it's mental health, or maybe it's both.
mm-hmm.
But they think that is what this disease is doing, right? That's where it shows up. And until it touches your family directly, like it has yours, Megan, it sort of, it wasn't invisible to you, certainly. But this idea that Jeff was sick, that he was in a condition, a brain disease condition that he couldn't see, that it was hard for him to understand as well, moves us towards understanding that these are sick people and not bad people. That we move from choice to let's get somebody help, just like you would diabetes or anything else. So I'd love for you to bounce off of that as makes sense to you.
It's really good. were talking this morning, Brett, because, as I reflect back to the first article I wrote, that was just very vulnerable and raw. And I feel like there was an innocence to it, but yet such a clear understanding too of stigma. And I look back to, in this article I'm referring to, as I wrote, it was really the first piece I wrote, and it was for Overdose Awareness Day and published in our local newspaper. And so then I just wrote another one 3 years later, and it was kind of meant to be, what has changed? Who am I even 3 years after? And it's so difficult to write because you only have 500 words. And as you know, there are a million lanes to this disease, to what lane are you even going to advocate for? And so, stigma is still alive and well. And I don't know, I think, of course, we've made progress. I just have to look at Narcan, the use of Narcan, and how socially acceptable it is. And that's a win, for lack of a better word, right there. However, I spend most of my time being the minority voice in the room. And that aligns with what the data shows. That I use the quote from Shatterproof, the nonprofit Shatterproof, who I really think just do such a great job of their website. It's just packed full of information. And their data, 75% of Americans do not believe substance use disorder is a chronic medical condition. So that aligns with my experience of I'm the minority voice, and we don't like to listen to each other. And I'll give you an example. I do a lot with local politics, and Yakima is a very conservative rural community. And so our local politicians tend to be of that vein. And so, yesterday at a coalition meeting, it just started down that path of, we got to get these guys off the street. Just you've heard it all. We've all heard it all 1,000 times. And he's just talking and talking. We're all just sitting quietly listening. And I always speak up. I do. And I try and tell my story. And he doesn't listen to a word I say. And quite frankly, I don't really listen to a word he says. And so this is a huge problem. And at the end, after I spoke and he didn't listen, he's like, well, I just think really we're a lot closer in what we want than you think. And, we're not close at all. He does not see addiction as a medical condition. He just doesn't. And so those conversations are kind of dead ends. And yet, if you want to change something and 75% of the room is the potential for a dead end conversation, it's no wonder you stop listening. Like I was not in a good mood yesterday. I was not in a great place. I didn't want to listen to this guy. I had already heard him a week before at our city council passing, no drug zone area, which just further stigmatizes, people who are trying to seek treatment because they've enacted this, drug-free zone. And of course, it's the area where all the treatment facilities, I can't think of the word, are. So it is, I don't know, but yet, had I not gone and had I not said my piece, it would have been a lost opportunity. But yet, does it make any difference? That is truly what I grapple with and what I'm grappling with again. Does this make one bit of difference? And I don't know. Today I would say no, because yesterday I walked out and it was less emotional. And that's the part that almost makes me sad. I don't get emotional anymore. I just get defeated. And it is hard to keep picking yourself up and going back. And somehow I do. I got a great night's sleep, and here I am talking to you.
Awesome. Well, let's play with that one for a little bit. So what would you say is the main differentiator? So you just mentioned it. Like I proposed that substance use disorder, opioid use disorder, the addiction, for those that are uncomfortable with those other words, let's just throw that in there so it's easier for some folks. What if you don't believe that that's a medical condition and it's simply a situation of choice? Mm-hmm. That's a huge barrier, right?
Huge.
So what I'm hearing you say, and I'd love to provoke you to talk more about this, his proposal, this particular individual, and we'll just use him as sort of the
he is.
He's the reference point for most of these conversations that are happening. Yes. I'm guessing he's talking about incarceration as being the solution.
Yes.
He's talking about, did he use negative terms like dirt bags or anything?
He didn't do that, but that's such a great question, Brett, or great point. Like, you can't unhear, like maybe just someone else that wasn't terribly stigmatizing his whole rant, for lack of a better word, because he didn't use junkie dirtbag. So he thinks he is not being stigmatizing, but it's equally as damaging.
So if you were, so I'm just trying to get toward I'm trying to find a bridge here, and maybe this is a faulty exercise, but let's just say this person who's never heard this before, who's hearing this kind of stuff for the first time and says, well, yeah, I'm from the Reagan era, we will find you and put you in jail. Right. And I'm just going to leave fentanyl off the table right now, because that's a whole nother ball of wax that's, as a part of this conversation, hasn't been around for very long. But what would you say, or how do you so you bring your story to that? So I'm guessing this guy says, the only real solution is to incarcerate our way out of it, right? No drugs, no drug-free zones, worse penalties, 3 strikes, or whatever terms you want to use. But basically, we just need to level the penalties such that it helps them change their behavior, or we get them off the streets where they're no longer a danger. Is that a fair summary?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So what do you say to that? I have ideas, but I'd love to hear what you have to say.
I know.
Yeah.
Right. What do you say to that? Because we're not listening to one another. So I could talk about a million things. Well, jail is more expensive. We don't have the in this particular issue, wanting to create the stay out of drug areas, it puts all the onus on judges. So they have to decide if there's, pretrial conviction or conviction, like, okay, you cannot go into these areas. So already your judges have too much on their plates. Then law enforcement, if you really talk to law enforcement, they'll be like, yeah, I'm not doing that. Like, we're just out here. I would say 99% of law enforcement who I've met are just really good people who are trying to do what they signed up to do, is to protect our community in one way, shape, or another. And so they're going to be like, yeah, I'm not doing that. So I'm trying to go back to your question. I think I would say the most important thing for ending stigma is that we all get to this place of acceptance that we're not going to save everyone. Not everyone wants treatment. Not everyone is going to be successful if you demand treatment. And we just have to accept a lot of things about this situation. We have to accept that, right now, people are working to stop the flow of drugs into our country. Some are going to get through it. We have to accept that. The thing we don't have to accept, though, is in the case of opioid use disorder, we have these medications that people still don't even know about, that they'll say, I don't know what that is, buprenorphine and methadone, that are really effective in treating opioid use disorder. And they're underutilized, mostly because of stigma. And so I remember hearing for the first time, we have to make these medications as easy to get as the fentanyl itself. And I just thought that's it. And so again, when you are tackling such a huge issue, like, are you gonna, work on the criminal justice side? Are you gonna stop the flow at the border? That's fine. That's your job. That's your prerogative. That's your deal. That's not mine. Mine is trying to get these medications on the streets, like through what we used to refer to as syringe service programs, now harm reduction programs, that you can go up and get Narcan, you can go up and get water, you can go up and get fentanyl test strips. Why can't you go up and be treated right then and there with methadone and buprenorphine? And I'm not going to go into why you can't. There's all sorts of regulations. They're changing, but like, that is why the answer to that, why you can't, stigma. Most people don't even want syringe service programs. I mean, again, the majority, if you go with the 75% statistic, they view those systems as enabling. So what do? The answer is you just accept people are going to use drugs. Not everyone wants treatment. Not everyone will be successful, but many do. So let's make it easier for them to access treatment. And that's, again, specific to opioid use disorder. So, yeah, did I answer your question?
Yeah, no, I love it. Let's bring some story into this. So I'd like to propose that one of the main reasons that stigma still has so much sway is that we don't see these people as people.
Right.
So we see this on T-shirts more and more. Recovery is possible, right? This idea that somebody like me is able to work their way toward understanding their predicament, which is really the bottom line. And then what am I going to do about it? What support services do I need? Or what can I do to help myself? First off, you got to get that information, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm going to suggest here that I know many people who are in recovery, and people from opioids as well. So I have several people in my life that are opioid heads, and my suggestion to those that are listening, and maybe it's to the choir, because that's probably the audience that I have.
Exactly.
But not, hopefully less, maybe not so much. Maybe I do know that I get listened to by a lot of people in corporate America that are unaware of this stuff. And that's really where I'm trying to be, because on the one hand, you don't think that your employees are coming to work at an IT company jacked on opioids. But guess what? Their kid might be going to school that way, or their kid might be in the hallway, and somebody I got Percocet. Yeah.
They may be. It's still very much overprescribed. I mean, there is still very much an pharmaceutical opioid issue in our country. We just talk about fentanyl more, which understandably, I'd rather we talk about fentanyl more, because it's, like people who work in this field say, oh, what I'd give to go back to the days of heroin. I would say what I wouldn't give to go back to the days of prescription opioid being the drug on the street. But anyways, continue on. I interrupted.
No, it's good. No, interruptions are welcome. Yes. So this, the lane I'm in, to use your words, so if we take the corporate America employee and we go back to the kid who's in that hallway, right? And their friend says, "Hey, I got some Percocets," right? Here's the trick, right? And you and I know this rote, but many people who listen to this may not. That Percocet may look like Percocet, maybe shaped like Percocet. You could hold it up next to another Percocet and said, "Ooh." And Percocet, by the way, is an opioid that is prescribed for pain very often. So they're, fairly common post-surgery, et cetera. So, and you look at it and you think, well, that's Percocet. Well, guess what? Like, one of the things that's happening in mass is that drug dealers are faking pills. So the pill looks like a Percocet, smells like a Percocet, it's colored like a Percocet, but they're putting fentanyl in it because fentanyl is a very inexpensive, high dosage opioid to put in there. And these people aren't scientists. And so suddenly you've got a kid who is overdosing from taking a pill that he or she thought was, a Percocet. So if we want to backpedal a little bit and say, well, first off, he shouldn't be taking Percocet, right? Right. So that's sort of the choice. And it's valid at this point. It's valid. Right. And humans have been using drugs for a long time. And most people that listen to this podcast go home and have their glass or two of wine and get jacked on the weekend. So this high and mighty thing. And there was a time when we tried prohibition here in the US and it didn't go so well. And there was a black market that came around it. I mean, there's examples in history that are tangible. They're not just, symbolic or mind estimates. And so we're in a position now where we have a conundrum in that we have this fentanyl out into the marketplace. Some are seeking it for its potency, for its getting high. So once again, they shouldn't be doing that. Well, okay. And then you take the person who's lost the choice, has lost any access to any willpower because their brain has been hijacked. Now I'm starting to sound like a bit of a diatribe, but I think it's useful, and you can correct me anytime along the way here, Megan. But my understanding of the brain disease of any kind of addiction is really centered on this idea that it becomes the equivalent of life.
Yes.
And so now all of a suddenly this drug is equal importance to, food, water, and it's risen to that level. And that was, my experience as well. So I just watched a video yesterday, and I'll put a link into the chat where this doctor was talking about, the brain disease of substance use disorder. And he suggested everybody in the audience hold your breath and keep holding it for a while. And you can go for a while and you're kind of okay. And then pretty soon it becomes urgent to take a breath, right? And that's really the predicament that people that have crossed into, disorder, opioid use disorder, substance use disorder, where there's no choice anymore. I'm going to take a breath. And then you add shame and stigma. So now I'm shameful about it. I don't want anybody to know. So now I'm, in my case, hiding booze around the house, right? Yep. Sneaking my drinks and carrying airline bottles in my socks everywhere I go. This is weird behavior, right? Well, who would do that? Well, guess what? I did, because it seemed an equivalent requirement for me to move about the world. So you got multiple things in play here. And then you get somebody like me who gets sober, and now you're quiet for 8 years because you don't want anybody to know that you're sober. What's wrong with that picture? Mm-hmm. Right? So I just threw a lot at you there, but
no. And I really appreciate that, because, it again, that it's such a huge concept of stigma. And sometimes, and I've asked you before, I'm like, sometimes I want to have a podcast about the difference between alcohol, the substance use disorder of alcohol versus the substance use disorder of fentanyl, and how, how different they are. But yet, am I allowed to say that? I'm not in recovery, but here's what I know. Here's what I know. With fentanyl now, the lifespan for when you need to use, again, I'm talking about people like Jeff, who at the end of his disease, it's 20 minutes before you go into withdrawal. People don't understand that and they don't believe it. How is that possible? How is it? But it is possible. That is the drug. And of course, people don't believe it and don't understand it because fentanyl, it was 2015 on the East Coast, 2017 on the West Coast. It is so new. And I appreciate you giving the backstory because I forget. I went home after we found Jeff and Googled fentanyl. Like I had no idea that what I would say he died of an accidental fentanyl overdose. I assumed he inadvertently took what he thought, what you're referring to as, a laced Percocet that he didn't know it was laced. No, he was addicted to fentanyl. He knew that what he was doing. He absolutely knew what he was doing. And so that's so loaded right there because then you get the argument like, why in the hell would someone keep doing a drug if they know it's going to kill them? And so I would propose, would know the potential is there to kill him. So I would propose the alternative to that story. How powerful is that a grown man who owns a business, who is successful, who has everything going for him, is consuming fentanyl several times a day? I had all his texts. I saw exactly what he was doing. And you cannot believe it, but we must believe it. We must, just like you said, we have to educate, like just you doing the backstory. Like I forget, I just assume, well, everyone knows what fentanyl is and I only have so much time. I only have so many words. Like what part do I focus on? And I think that is really difficult right now for everyone. It is so chaotic. We are trying to figure it all out, but it's so new and it's so horrible. And so kind of to push that back to you, Brett, like, I stigmatize sometimes in terms of like alcohol. Like if you're in recovery from alcohol, and I hear this still, I heard it yesterday in the group, in the coalition meeting, we have one guy in recovery who comes, he's in recovery from alcohol. And what I want to say to him, and I can't, because I don't know, except for I saw it, is you have no idea the difference of your drugs. But is that fair? Is that furthering stigma? That's what I ask you.
Yeah. Well, I lean on my story, and in my case, I was a big fan of opioids. So, and I share that at meetings and stuff too. At certain meetings that I go to, it's supposed to be about alcohol or whatever. I paint outside. I want people around me to know that I use cocaine, that I used, opioids. So I think that gives me at least a little bit more insight, but the concepts are still similar and the same in my mind, right?
But what about alcohol? Here's where I think the difference is.
Yeah, hit me.
We hate hard, I'm putting in quotes, we despise, hate hard drugs in this country. Yeah. And we accept alcohol. And I think that is really an issue. I think we've never and again, like you said earlier, history bears out all the facts. You look at what we refer to as the war on drugs and who was penalized, who was in our jails, we do not like hard drugs and we accept alcohol. And so I think that's still the difference. And I've said this to you before, like the dinner party. And we had a dinner party not long after Jeff died, or who knows how long it was. And there were several bottles of wine opened, and it was so evident to me. I'm like, okay, what if Jeff had pulled up a chair, been at this dinner party, which he could have been very easily, and been like, hey guys, okay, well, now it's time for me to use my fentanyl or even opioids. Okay, let's go back to opioids. Hey, it's time for me to take my opioids. Illicit opiates. I'm not taking them for back pain. I'm just here taking my drugs. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Just not acceptable. And so I struggle with this, Brett, because I don't want to come at it from a place of stigma. But yet, if you can get people to also view and look at the history of how we have treated other drugs besides alcohol, and I want to be clear, like alcohol is horrible. Like it kills more people in alcohol-related illnesses than any drug. Like it's not a pretty one either, but it is socially acceptable. And there is stigma. So both things are true. There's stigma for alcohol, and there is stigma for illicit drugs. But it's, again, people forget. How did we get this fentanyl epidemic started? It didn't just come out of nowhere. It came from prescribed opioids. Anyway, it's hard not to go off on soapbox.
No, that's what we're here for.
So,
yeah.
What would you say about that? That
Yeah,
argument of, alcohol and stigma and how we tell that story.
Yeah, I have. I come down on the side of that people like altered states of consciousness, some more than others, right? And there's a reasonable argument for somebody to say, you know what, alcohol is fine in our society. We can have it. And, most people can have their couple of drinks a night, even get good and lit up, over Christmas, and then they return to their lives. Right. And that was what's different for somebody like me. So similarly, opioids, same thing. I get access to some. I used them, loved it. And so this socially acceptable thing, I'm trying to come at it kind of directly, but indirectly too. So let's take this individual who, said, well, my alcohol is not a problem. First off, it may or may not be, because that's part of the brain disease, is our sense of reality goes sideways. But similarly, we have a ton of evidence to point at what you just shared. When we flooded our society with opioids fairly recently, and there's a million sources of information. I'll slam some in the show notes if you don't know that story that's still going on, that many people got very sick and very, very over their skis with opioid use disorder that were otherwise fine, upstanding members of society, from a knee surgery, from back pain, etc. And so at that point in time, as a society, we said, well, that's okay, because it's not, there was some nefarious marketing going on about the how dangerous it was, how addictive it was. That was really terrible. And there's amazing movies. I'll put a couple in the show notes as well that I've watched, so that you can see it play out in front of you. But the point is that people that you wouldn't think of as being addicts, that weren't experimental like me, became addicts, right? And then enter fentanyl into the scene, where now it's not getting heroin to save yourself the pain of withdrawals. Because you mentioned that a minute ago, and they call it dope sick, folks. People that I know that have been dope sick, it is oogly. It is bad. And so socially acceptable to have alcohol. not socially acceptable to have opioids, but I would argue that to you, that in my circles it was.
Yeah.
Like for us to say, hey, we're having a party tonight, somebody breaks out that would have been acceptable.
Yeah. And maybe you're right.
That was under the radar.
You're right. Maybe that would have been the case.
Yeah.
For
your mom and dad, for your folks, the wine on the table is fine. And, if the kids are going to go have shots at the bar, that's fine too. And, he shouldn't drive tonight and all that. But quietly, there might be cocaine, there might be opioids, and there are some that are comfortable with it and many that aren't. And I'm going to share with this group that if you're totally uncomfortable with that, I can guarantee you that you've been in a place where that is going on, right?
Yeah.
And in some cases, people can do that and do it in a responsible way and have a good time with it and enjoy the experience. But it is dangerous because a lot of us can't. Or we find our way into we can't anymore, and it's now we've driven ourselves into a box canyon, and there's no freaking way out. And now is when we need some signposts. Now is when we need a helicopter to come in, and the only way you're going to do that is if people are more aware of it and see those people as human beings that are deserving of an opportunity to get well, that are called ill as opposed to bad people. And given access to the resources that are available, not like they should be, because to your point, jails are expensive.
Yeah.
So now I'm soapboxing. How about that?
I don't know. I would say, in summary, 3 years later, there's been great things. Narcan's huge. I mean, how many lives have we saved because of Narcan? How many? That's what's going to be the next interesting set of data. Like, how many would be dead without Narcan? Or looking at how many are alive because of Narcan. So, when I take a step back, yes, differences are being made. It's too slow. It's too slow for me. And that's the dilemma, because of stigma. But stigma against Narcan changed, so I think it will change. But there is something that propels me forward. So I must think that. Deep inside, I must believe, no, we'll get there. And talking about it's good. This has just been really good because it reminds me of we are making progress. I just feel defeated so much of the time. And part of that is just like I started out saying at the beginning of the podcast, it's hard to be the minority voice in the room and to leave and to think, okay, am I the nutty one? Like maybe I'm the one who has this wrong. And that need for validation, like how I struggle with the need for validation. Like, nope, you're not wrong. And the struggle of, does the loudest voice always win? Because that's the thing I struggle with a lot. Because certainly in my circles, in terms of like what I'm trying to do as a community activist, yeah, the loudest voice always wins because they're the elected officials and they get to say what they want. And that's just the way it's going to be. And so I think, again, kind of that idea of acceptance of I have to do my part too, in terms of stigma, of radical acceptance. Yeah, you are going to be the voice that is quieter. And that's just the way it goes. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't speak out. And yeah. So I don't know. We could talk about this for hours, but it's good to talk about. And I do think in 3 years, things have changed. I have to remember that. We still way too many people are dying. And hopefully that will change too. So I guess it comes back to, you also have to have hope. That's it. You have to have hope. I have to have hope. Or else what am I doing?
Yeah. Hope is key. one thing, the latest government estimate is there's about 22, 23, maybe even 24 million people in recovery in the U.S. If all of those people came out of the shadows tomorrow and said, hey, I'm in recovery, I used to be, passed out drunk or jacked, or I put myself in dangerous situations, we'd change this overnight. So that's
24 million in recovery.
Yeah. It's about 6% of the U.S. population. So if you're in a room,
I think that's just such a powerful message. Yeah. And that speaks to why Overdose Awareness Day, why it is important to get those voices of recovery out there. And I get that. And we cannot forget those who've died. So like most things in life, it can be both. And that's what I have to accept about Overdose Awareness Day, that it is both. It is stories of recovery and it is stories of death. And you just validated for me why it's important, because we need, of those 24 million, we need hundreds of them at Overdose Awareness Day talking about it. And we need hundreds talking about their loved ones who've died, because that's how we don't forget. And that's important. So
let's end on the Narcan positive note, because I got to hang. I don't think he'll mind me using his name in this. If he does, I'll check with him first. But my friend Brian Hughes, I went to one of his webinars the other day and it was really great, and it was on opioids.
What?
Yeah, on root cause analysis, and it was really cool. So I'll send you the recording.
And send it to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brian and I grew up together, and he was also a friend of Jeff's. And anyway, he shared a story during the call about a friend of his. He didn't name them, but Gen Xer, was at a party, fully engaged in life, not somebody, that you think of as the typical addict or whatever, whatever word you want to use, at a party. And the scenario I just proposed to you happened. They were offered, a prescription opioid or two, and they said, yeah, heck yeah. And so they took it, and it had fentanyl in it. And somebody at the party had Narcan, and he probably wouldn't be alive. So that's a story that I'll check with Brian. I want to share more, because this idea that it's not just the people that need it that are already addicted to fentanyl, but it's also people that don't know that they're basically being poisoned with fentanyl.
Yeah, that's still out there.
And so let's just mention to folks that don't know what Narcan is, don't know what naloxone is, right? That there's this magic spray that can bring people back from an overdose, like right now, and gives them another shot at finding their way to health.
Yeah.
So speak about, because I know you even give presentations on how to deliver it and all that stuff, Megan. So a lot of people won't know about this. So take a second.
Yeah. And what I'll say is, Brad, is again, I'm so glad you bring this up, because I just kind of realized, wow, I don't really hear any more negative pushback about Narcan in the community. Like there was, and there was a time I was speaking out about it, because there was a big pushback against Narcan vending machines, because those are enabling, and that rhetoric, that's not really accepted anymore in our community. I don't, if people believe that, they don't say it anymore, because it's just you hear too many stories like the one you just shared. And so, yeah, but Narcan, yeah, it's just, you can get it for free. I'll send you the link so you can embed that in your podcast through People's Harm Reduction out of Seattle. If you live in Washington State, they will mail it to you. And it restores breathing. So an overdose, fentanyl overdose, opioid overdose, too much of a drug, and it suppresses the respiratory system. Narcan just wakes up the respiratory system. And so, again, I'll share the story because people are also under the false assumption that, okay, well, if someone was resuscitated from Narcan, then they're going to go immediately to get help and treatment. No, they law enforcement, first responders will tell you they are resuscitating the same people in the same week or month. I mean, that again is how powerful the drug is. But you cannot treat dead people, and these sayings, they are powerful. You cannot treat a dead person. And so we keep them alive, and we hope that, the first time does the trick, the second time, third time, fourth time, fifth time, sixth time. What do we care? What do we care? If it's your son, daughter, brother, cousin, you'd want them kept alive. And so we just keep them alive and hope that that is the instigator to seek treatment. And more importantly, that treatment is available right then and there. Otherwise, withdrawal is just too miserable and you're going to go use again. So yeah, that's what I'd say about Narcan. It's huge. We've made huge strides.
Corporate America, for those that are listening in, how about putting Narcan in every one of your first aid kits at every floor, in every corporate building? And the idea that maybe you're helping somebody on the floor, but maybe you're just driving awareness, because those same people can go and buy it for free or they can get it for free, or just go buy it at Rite Aid, put it in their car. So when they see something happening, they give that person another shot. And I'll say this too, to sort of push back against the argument, well, they're just going to redo it. I heard something said the other day on a call that I really liked. Somebody said, well, yeah, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink, right? And then somebody came back with, yeah, but you can leave the water there, and you can make sure that water is there all the time, right?
I love that.
Because recovery is possible. People do find their way after getting, really rough circumstances. Having Narcan around when Jeff was alive would have been amazing, right? Who knows, right? Who knows?
Who knows?
Yeah. So we became friends over time, Megan. I love our chats.
Me too. You keep me motivated.
So proud of the work that you do, and I'll put lots of links in the show notes, including a link to the newspaper article that you wrote about Jeff on International Overdose Awareness Day, which is, we haven't even said it, it's the 31st, isn't it?
It's the 31st. Yep. And it's celebrated all different days. We're celebrating it the 30th in Yakima. So yeah. And I'll send you the link for the free Narcan too for Washington State. Yeah.
Good.
Okay.
All
Always
right.
great. Thank you for keeping me hopeful and motivated. I needed it this morning.
Same.
All right. Good to see you, Brett.
Okay.
Okay. Bye.